Okay, very
Yeah.
official. So yeah, I'm trying to get the year down, but it was approximately 2005. In 2005, I bought what is now known as the Grand Pyramid Cottage, which is one of the older houses in Garfield Historic District, 1907 Grand Pyramid Cottage. I think it's the oldest Grand Pyramid Cottage. A few people at Historic Preservation have told me this side of the Mississippi, which may or may not be true. But in any case, it's a very old house and one of the oldest of its typology. There's a lot of pyramid cottages in the Garfield Historic District. It's actually one of the first places in Arizona where the pyramid cottage was built as a topology, sort of at a large scale. So I've seen a lot of change in those 15 years from 2005 to today. And I'd say almost entirely good change. Like it was, you could say a rough area, especially when I first moved in. The year I moved in, there was so much crime on my street and in my area. It was very concerning. There was a lot of gang activity. And to the point where I was like, shoot, I made a miscalculation. Like I shouldn't be here, you know? And I was told by some people in my neighborhood, you shouldn't be here. But today, 15 years later, I've never been more integrally connected to my neighborhood and my neighbors. And I know my neighbors. I know people that live on, 3 streets north and 3 streets south more than I would have ever known anybody or did ever know anyone in my actual, like in my other neighborhoods that I've lived. And I'd say a big part of the positive change that's happened in Garfield in recent years does have to do with the commercial, it's not the commercial overlay, it's the small business arts overlay that exists in Garfield. And that is an effort to encourage small businesses like my own, like Kaiser Works. Kaiser Works works out of the 2nd floor of the Grand Pyramid Cottage. Upstairs and downstairs has now been sort of bifurcated, which is perfect. It's just the right amount of separation for me because I actually psychologically still do go to work and still do go home. And it is, a 5-minute walk through the garden. But the arts business overlay that exists is precisely an effort to encourage small business owners to do that kind of thing, whether it's a salon or an architecture studio or whatever it is. So I've seen that, and also the transit overlay. We're in the transit overlay district. That does a lot for businesses in the area as well, given our proximity to the 2 light rail stops, one on Washington and one on Central and Roosevelt. We capitalized on both of those overlays when we did projects, for example, like Welcome Diner. Welcome Diner's 2 doors east of my residence and the office. And for that project, for example, I think we were going to need 44 parking spaces based on our interior and exterior seat count combined. And we approached the variance hearing with these overlays in our back pocket, basically saying, we live close to light rail. We want to promote a walkable city. And we went from 44 some odd spaces required to, I think, 14. We ended up providing 14 parking spaces. So I'm trying to think what else I can hit without hitting any specific topics. I'm just kind of rambling at this point, but I love Garfield. I love being a business owner in Garfield. I love being a resident in Garfield. I could certainly be more involved in the community. Garfield community, like they get together once a month and talk about ongoings in the neighborhood. That's something I need to get more engaged in. But on a grassroots level, just being a person who's available to my community, if there's ever a crisis or that kind of thing, I think I'm available in that kind of capacity. And Garfield really is a neighborhood that people use their front porches, people walk on the streets. The fact that we have these commercial entities, you'll actually see people. It's like a little small town in a way, especially the hub, which I would consider 10th Street and Pierce, with Pueblo Plant Store, Block Photo Studio, Gallo Blanco, Welcome Diner, and new things coming. We're actually doing some feasibility studies on that intersection right now to bring in more commercial into that area. So it's an exciting place for me personally. It's also been a bit of a playground because it's not a established historic district. I think I was able to do some of the projects I've done, like Silo House. The Silo House, I think if I had tried to do that in Willow or in Canto, they would have been like, you know, take a hike. They were actually very receptive towards that, and I owe it partially due to the fact that my hearing officer, he was a super old timer guy, and he walked in and I was like, shoot, like I actually thought immediately this could either go really good or really bad. Do you guys know the Silo project by chance? Have you done any, have you heard of that project?
I saw some images on your guys' website.
Okay.
Just briefly, yeah.
Yeah, so the Silo project, grain silo that I purchased and built behind a red brick duplex, 1926 red brick duplex in Garfield. And most everybody that I was talking to at the city was like, you know, you're building a rocket ship, this thing's crazy. Are you gonna put mission tile and stucco? I actually had multiple conversations where people were like very seriously wanting me to stucco the silo. Anyway, that's another story. But my point is, it's a fairly radical thing, you know, and historic preservation could have shut it down. They could have said this does not fit within the historic context, and yet they didn't. And I do owe that somewhat to the fact that Garfield was a little bit more edgy. It was more of a pioneer. It was untapped. It was also, I think, in need of some architectural love, and also just let's put Garfield on the map. Things like Welcome Diner have put Garfield on the map. Gallo Blanco, obviously, that's a great, super amazing Mexican restaurant. Both restaurants have cult followings. With regard to architecture, something like the Silo, which is not benign. It is not neutral. It is sort of punch you in the face. It's a little bit aggressive as a form. And that's precisely the kind of thing that I thought Garfield could use to sort of communicate to the greater world, which is my selfish ambition. I wanted to communicate to the greater populace that, hey, this is a cool place to be. This is a safe place to invest. This is a safe place to live. And so projects that would get some visibility, like the Silo House or like Welcome Diner, I think are exactly what that context needs. So yeah, I'll stop rambling and let you guys ask a question or two or whatever you have.
I guess my first question would be, where were you educated?
Where was I educated? You mean formally, like formal education?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Because I was going to say the streets of Garfield is where I was educated. That's my official answer. I was educated, I started at ASU, and I transferred, well, I did the exchange program to University of Stuttgart in Germany. So I finished my undergrad in Stuttgart. When I was at the University of Stuttgart, I actually transferred to the ACA, the Academy of Art and Architecture, which is also in Stuttgart. So ASU, University of Stuttgart, the Academy of Art and Architecture in Stuttgart. And then I went to Harvard for my master's. And there was a year and a half between those two. And in that year and a half, I worked for DeBartolo Architects, Jack DeBartolo. And I actually worked for Jack before and after grad school. Yeah, and that was a great experience. Somewhat ironically, my second studio professor at Harvard was Rick Joy, who was a guest professor, happened to be a guest professor from Tucson. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And I knew Rick, or we had worked together a little bit on I was working for Rick on I-10 Studios, which was this conglomerate pop-up office between Rick Joy, Marwan Al-Sayed, and Wendell Burnett working together to do an Amangiri resort. And I was part of that team on the outset. So I knew Rick a little bit. Anyway, that's a tangent. That's my answer. That's the end of my answer.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I'll ask the next question. So how long have you been working in the field of architecture?
Since 2000, since 2004 or 5, you know, is when I first started working in the field of architecture. And then I started my own thing probably in 2007. And I think it was in 2007 roughly that I started Plus Minus Studio with my old business partner, Hayes McNeil. And we ran that for, well, actually 2006 is when we started it. In 2008, we shut it down because the economy tanked and the floor dropped out. And within the space of a month and a half, a series of 6 phone calls, all of our projects just, boop, you know, evaporated. And everybody was just, everybody was tapping out. Everybody was declaring bankruptcy. Like that was I mean, not as major as the Great Depression, but that was, that's my Great Depression in my lifetime. You know, that was a big, scary thing. And so when that happened, I started doing consulting for other offices. I was doing competitions and renderings. And I got very good at renderings. The thing that I did sort of reluctantly initially is something that I was getting better at and doing more and more. I was just more invested emotionally and interested in doing a good job. So before long, I was doing renderings for Wendell Burnett, Will Bruder, DeBartolo, Richard Bauer. I don't know. There's a handful of architecture offices that I survived by because they were landing international work, and they wanted to land more work, and so they would pay people like me to come in and help make pretty pictures to land projects. You know, so doing front end, some conceptual design and renderings and competition stuff is what I did from that point forward for about 3 years, and then I eventually started taking on some like real architecture work along the way. And within the space of a couple of years, I flipped from going, you know, from doing 10% real architecture and 90% renderings to the opposite of that. And today we don't really do renderings much at all. We almost can't afford to do the type of renderings we do for my own projects. And so it's only when there's a bond election or a variance or some public thing that people need some, I mean, we can do quick and dirty, you know, renderings, no problem, but we tend to do, it's not represented anywhere. We don't really show this off on our website and stuff like that because we're not trying to get work like that. But it was something that sustained me for a long time. Here I am, rambling again.
Rambling is good sometimes.
All right.
So I guess branching off of that, this wasn't one of my questions on my list, but how has COVID or the pandemic, I guess, affected your business? Has it at all, or has it made it better or worse?
It has affected it very much so, I'd say socially, like and for me personally, like emotionally, before I get into that though, I'll just say that we have been blessed by clients that have basically preserved our workflow all the way through this thing. I haven't had to lay anybody off. In fact, I hired somebody just before COVID happened. And it's been pretty amazing how we've been able to maintain normalcy to a degree. Like we're working remotely. There's 2 of us in the office typically, and we work on the other side of the room from each other. And then we're doing Zoom meetings like multiple times a day with the rest of the team. And that works pretty seamlessly. We're on Dropbox, so we all have a shared folder system. Between Dropbox and Zoom, really those 2 tools, we're able to pretty much maintain the same amount of, I would say, efficiency. There's no doubt that you lose some efficiency because now you've got employees that are working next to their dog or their baby or that kind of thing, or their spouse. But I think you also do save time because there's not as much office chit chat and that kind of thing, you know? So I wonder if those 2 cancel each other out. What's interesting now is that people want to come back to work. You know, people have been away long enough where they're like, can we come back? You know, they want to come back. And right now, this week, part of the reason I'm doing this in my car is our AC just went out at the office. And so I decided to run errands for this part of the day. So I'm going to UPS and a bunch of stuff. But yeah, if it wasn't for that, two of the guys would probably be back at the office now. So we've had a core group of clients that have maintained us through COVID. Precisely when I thought these projects were going to go belly up, they were saying, no, we're gonna proceed, and we fully expect that by the time the projects are finished, you know, some normalcy will have returned to the world. So that's all good. And then personally, I mean, COVID's probably been good for me because it's a very serious thing and a very heavy thing. And there's also just a lot of heaviness going on in the world right now. The world feels like a little bit of a darker place than it was a couple of years ago to me.
Yeah.
And because that's true, like for the last 3 months, I have been off of social media. It all feels so very vapid and superficial. And so if anything, this is causing some good introspective thinking on my part, where I'm just thinking like, okay, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What really matters? So there's been a lot of good that's come out of it, I think, or that is coming out of it. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
And then I'm going to get more into like the detailed questions here. So personally, like, what do you think is working well or not working well so far on Roosevelt Road?
That's a good question. I mean, there is a lot of like, it's not big box development, but there are big developer driven projects that have come into the area that, I mean, on one hand, I appreciate the scale that's been introduced by a lot of the large development projects. Houseman's Paris was like the idyllic urban city where you have a certain width of street and generally a 5-story high with commercial at the base and residential above with some office mixed in. Like that's, if you blur your eyes, that's kind of what they're going for. But there's just a lot of it's done kind of cheap and dirty and not a lot of terribly thoughtful design in it. This is not true of the smaller grassroots projects, like, well, Greenwood Brewery is a brewery that we just finished up. Megan Greenwood is the brewmaster. This was a sort of brewery by females for females, kind of, and great products. And she's got amazing talent, and she makes really, really good beer. And so we did this microbrewery for her right on Roosevelt and 3rd or 4th Street, and it just opened recently. Greg and Cindy Dash, who are very much involved in the Roosevelt Row scene, own the real estate that sits on. So those kind of projects where it is for and somewhat by, by and somewhat for people that have been invested in the area for a very, very long time, those are fantastic projects, and the kind of projects that have heart and soul, and people love to go to them. But when you have investment groups that fly in from who knows from where, or maybe they don't even fly in, they're like, yep, let's do one right here, and boom, they like drop 30 million on a big heartless, soulless kind of project. So again, those are bringing in density. Those are bringing in 24-hour life. 24-hour life is, as Jane Jacobs famously talked about, I believe, is important. So you don't have people just like coming down to the ball game and then going back to their house in the suburbs. They're actually living down here. Getting ASU to be downtown, humongous. Like that's 24-hour life. You have 5,000 to 7,000 students that live now in the vicinity and feed into this the commercial aspect of the downtown core. Use the sidewalks, use the parks, all that kind of stuff. So these big box or these large residential projects that are popping up like nuts down here are good in that regard. They're bringing 24-hour life to the downtown core, and that's directly feeding a lot of the businesses in Roosevelt Row. So yeah.
So for our project, how do you believe that we could incorporate artistic influence in our theater project that we're doing?
So tell me about your theater project. Where is it and what is it exactly?
It's on Roosevelt and 2nd Street. You know the park that has the little kid on the wall with the birds flying out of it and the wings
Oh,
that
right.
everybody stands in front of? That's our
Yeah,
site,
yeah.
that grass area right there. So
Okay.
we'll be building a small theater. How many seats is it, Nick?
250 it says.
Nice.
Yeah,
How
so
many
pretty
stories?
small. It just
Single?
depends on your design, whatever you want to do, but 250
Okay.
seat theater. We'll be designing it soon.
Great. Okay. And sorry, what's the question?
How do you think we could incorporate the artistic influence of the area into our design?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I'll just tell you that one of my pet peeves, oh, I shouldn't even say this, but so frequently, put a bird on it. What's that from? Put a bird on it. It's from Portlandia, maybe. Is it Portlandia? Where if you want to make something cool, you put a bird on it. This is, maybe I'm dating. This is only like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I don't know what it was, but it was this skit that the guys from Portlandia did, I think. But pretty much, if you want to make something cool, whether it's a car or a mural or whatever, boop, you like put a bird on it. And the put a bird on it for developers in downtown Phoenix is like murals. So if you're a big developer and you're doing this, you're bringing in a bunch of investors and you're dropping a $30 million 5-story thing, and you want to make sure you're tied in with the community, they always do the same thing. They like get 3 mural artists to go have fun, and so they just pick 3 people. It seems to be at random, and they go do a thing on the side of this thing, and then so the developers feel like, okay, we've tapped in, we've reached out, and we feel connected to this community because we've done this thing. And I'm sorry, it just feels, sorry, I just lost one of my earbuds, but we're operating on half an earbud or one earbud. That is, what's the word for it? It's very token. It's like a token gesture, right? And it may be, if on one hand, it's legitimate because you're reaching it. There's a real artist that lives in this community that you're supporting that person. They live and breathe the ether of that little ecosystem. And so when they're doing their art, in a way that kind of ties it legitimately to the project. I don't know that this answers your question very much, but if I was going to put a theater there, I would make sure that the art, so for example, iLounge, which is almost directly across the street from where you guys are operating. Greg and Cindy own it. They used to have these murals that no longer exist because we did our brewery project right there. But these murals would announce like the Chili Pepper Festival and things that were happening in that area. So I think if you had a local artist that was painting what is going on in the theater this week, next month, whatever, because that's the only way I'm going to go to that theater. If I'm driving by and I'm like, no kidding, they're going to do, that's informative. It's a local artist, and it's gravity. It will pull people in to that, Otherwise, you got tons of people leaving thousands of office buildings every single day of the week, leaving, just like pouring out of the city, and they don't even know. They have no idea that there's stuff going on available to them, So that's a thought. I would also keep it recurring, like the mural you referenced on the side of Monarcha Gallery. Chris Boner, I think, is the name of the artist that did that. He did that thing years ago. Nobody touches it. It's beautiful. Everybody loves it. And that's good. There is time and a place for a piece of art, if it's that good, to just become, the thing that you expect to see when you turn that corner, and that's fine and good. But unless it's that good, I think recurring art that is changed regularly, that's either seasonal or at a smaller scale than seasonal, that talks about the activity, the things that are going on, or promotions or whatever. I think that's the way that I would do it. And you might also consider bringing in, so Welcome Diner does this movie competition every year, where it's a mess. It's a train wreck, but they basically say, here's an idea for a movie. they give you a sentence and a concept, and you literally have like an hour, I think, to shoot this movie. And then they, you know, I've always thought, give people a week, you know, or 2 weeks, like let them like make something cool. But my point is, like, whatever this theater is, I think it would be cool if they brought in like nationally recognized artists and theater groups, but also brought in like almost like intermingled with people in the area, you know, where you do some stuff that's kind of slapstick and not taking itself too seriously, where you let people in the community and they get to share that grandstand, they get to share that stage with like legit people. This could be kids, this could be whatever. I think that'd be a cool thing. I'll stick with that as my answer. I don't know, I can't think of anything else offhand.
Then kind of flowing into your answers, how you were talking about like the exterior, how would you think about like continuing that experience internally, whether it's like architecturally or artistically, how you kind of talked about already?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, again, it might be interesting programmatically to, because typically a theater can be somewhat alienating. Like, it's kind of like going to a movie theater where you walk in and here they have the concessions and here they've got some t-shirts you can buy. And there's some lady in a hat, you know, telling you about whatever. And then there's the bathrooms and the drinking fountains. And that's generally what the kind of the stuff that happens in between the sidewalk and the stage. And I think it'd be cool if you could imbue the fabric of that building. I mean, if you could program into it, program that would bring people from the community in the building, through the building, you know? So again, like maybe it's theater, maybe there's theater classes that take place in the building, maybe it's artist studios, maybe it's just space that's available for rent for small businesses or whatever. Like if that kind of thing could happen, maybe off of, I mean, it would make sense if it was retail, for example. If it was retail, you walk into the lobby space and instead of having just like popcorns and theater t-shirts, it's actually a boutique, locally owned, you know, that's part of that. So you could sort of blur the lines a little bit that way would be one option. And yeah, another thought that comes to mind is history. Like historically speaking, I'd be kind of curious to know Wayne Newton. He was a famous artist that lived in Coronado Historic District. Like, are there famous theater people that lived in this area? Can you tie the project historically to anything? Like, who knows? Maybe 300 feet away was the first playhouse in Arizona. I don't know. Like that could be interesting. If that was the case, you could tie this project to almost like an homage, you know, to this incredibly strong and heroic and pioneering theater group that existed in the 1940s in Phoenix, Arizona, of all places. That's probably not true. If it is, I would look, you know, I would just do some digging and see if you could tie it to something like that, because that would sort of historically charge it. Anything you can do to tie your project to real history. Generally, that history is staring you in the face, and you don't have to go dig it up. But it's a shot in the dark. But you might look into that.
So going back to when you were speaking about your silo project, since our site is kind of small, how would you go about, or how do you go about making small spaces feel comfortable and do it successfully, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm usually dealing with such small spaces. There is a requirement to choose your battles in a way. So like generally speaking, I'll make compromises on what I call, or what I would consider ancillary or secondary spaces. So in the silo house, for example, I don't have a massive bathroom with cathedral ceilings. Like I push program in the silo house. It's a round thing. And I made a crescent of program, very dense program at the edge, in effort to keep the central space feeling open and vertical. And I think it would be a similar kind of thing with this, where I would choose probably a very aggressive strategy to take, you know, you list all your program out, everything from the bathrooms to where they take your tickets to all the stuff. And you could probably take everything that is less than 300 square feet and say, all this junk it's not junk, it's essential. You need bathrooms, you need storage closets and mop closets and all that stuff. But all of these smaller program, I'm going to call that aggregate, and I'm going to shove all my aggregate to one side and one bar in effort to like leave the rest of it to be as big a theater as you could, you know, cram on that site. So generally I'm making, to me, it's a game. Like, and also you can like Frank Lloyd Wright, he would always talk about, you know, do you compress phenomenologically, do you compress the user or the patron at the entry, for example, and you squeeze them down to like 6'6", and they're walking through a tube, and then boom, it opens up, you know? And so you can do that with program too, for example, like all this, the aggregate that I was just talking about could be this thickened wall of, you know, 10 feet of program right on Roosevelt, and you walk through that as a portal, boom, into this theater space, and you've just walked past all like the gritty necessary program, and that becomes this buffer between you and the outside world. So generally I'm looking for like, what's the program that to me is not the thing that I want to showcase, and what can I do with that? And then what is the thing that I must have? What is the money shot? What is the thing that really makes this project sing? And that's the one you want to organize everything around, you know? So I'm generally playing a game like that, almost an effort to surprise. Like people are like, whoa, like I did not think you would get a theater this big, this, you know, this size on this site. There's many different ways to do that. I'm trying to think with your site specifically, I don't know. I mean, it could make sense. If you got vertical, you could get views potentially, but not really. You'd have to, not with all that new stuff. But you could make an argument that the ground floor is more about the buzz of the city. Like if you've ever been down there on a First Fridays and you see hundreds and hundreds of people walking around, like it's hard to imagine now because everyone's locked up. But you could say that first floor is all about porosity and pedestrian and the context, the people, the neighborhood. There could be the artists or whatever are working on that first floor. It's also the thing you pass through, and only when you go up onto that upper level or upper levels are you into the theater world. And the theater's a little bit like perched up above, you know, the ground plane. I forget what your question was actually, but how's that?
That's good.
Okay.
And then last question on our list of questions would be, how important is collaboration, not only in your firm, but just in the architectural world?
I think it's very important. It depends though. Like it depends. Like one of my favorite things about working with a team of people, my team of people, is finding and honing and allowing the different skills that exist with different people to flourish. Like, so I have there's just different, people are built differently. Everyone has strong suits. Everyone has different inclinations. And I think it's kind of wonderful to see those different things play out when we're all attacking a problem. I'm generally very big picture and broad strokes, grand vision. I don't want to get, I love it. I love when you put your hand on the handle and that wood feels just amazing, and the click when you turn it, and like the way these hinges operate, like the detail stuff is beautiful, wonderful. I love it. But I personally don't have the patience to like dial that in. And I do have the patience. I did it like with the silo, I had to do it. And, but that's not my strong suit. So the way that my team, for example, right now, operates is a little bit like a symphony. That's a very positive way to put it, but it is like, you need all those different instruments doing what they're doing. And everyone plays a different role. And it is awesome when these different roles and different like scaled minds go to work and produce one thing, you know? So that is something that I think is invaluable. Where I pause when I hear collaboration is like, we've probably all experienced a little bit. Well, I'll just say I've experienced where I I'm working on a school project and I've got this idea and somebody else has an idea and you want to be nice. You don't want to be like, well, that's not as good as my idea. And so you kind of like mash them together and they become this like, this fusion of the two, which, as my mom always said, the worst, or maybe, this is funny. I'm conflating. I'm not sure if it was my mom or Max Underwood that said this, but the worst enemy of a good idea is another good idea. You know, like you generally a project's going to have one strong elemental thing that's driving it, that project's about, that people talk about. And that driving thing could actually be detailing throughout, you know, like it's not really like a grand idea. It could be more about the craft of the thing. But conceptually speaking, if you have one conceptual driver, generally it's not helped by, hey, here's 3 more. Let's just throw these in too, you know. That generally muddies the water and it dilutes the strength of the singular, you know, idea. And so that's when collaboration is not super helpful. But generally speaking, I think when teams are working together, I mean, it's got to be a good team. And I've never experienced otherwise. I've always been blessed to have a good team that does seem to work very, very well together. It does take time for each of those individuals to kind of find their place in the matrix, you know. And that's just like when you watch the very first episode of anything, The Simpsons, or Kramer, what was he? Seinfeld, you know, like these characters, like when you watch the very first episode, it's a little bit clunky and you can still kind of figure out these people aren't acting in their full character. They haven't found it yet. And the same thing is true in an office dynamic. And I think that's, in order for collaboration to be positive, I think that has to be a part of it. Otherwise there's a lot of stepping on toes and insecurities and like, how come I can't, you know, whatever, work the blinker or the rudder or all that stuff. So that's my answer.
Yeah. I think that's all the questions that we have, right, Nick?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for agreeing to this interview.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Very good. Okay, thank you guys. Good luck to you guys.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, all right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.